Hello, everybody. Beau Billington here with the Free Agent. So excited to have Jake Stahl. Jake, thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
Yeah, so I'm super pumped about kind of this discussion because you're a chief learning officer. We'll learn about what that is, but also a sales coach, and you are, in addition to that, a fractional sales coach, chief learning officer, etc. So the one thing that I've identified within the fractional space that keeps folks up at night is typically sales, right? So super pumped to have you here. Thanks for joining. Would love to hear kind of the quick 30 seconds on kind of your background, your bio, and why people should listen up.
Sure. So, Bo, I've been in training and development for 30 years. I've done it across 6 countries, 10,000 plus people. And the thing that gets me into this and keeps me awake at night is the fact that we're not doing enough in the way of communicating. So, when I say communicating, I mean making sure our point gets across clearly and concisely, and we're checking for value.
Mhm.
So part of my training is making sure that that happens with sales reps and fractionals and what they have for their prospects.
Mhm.
And the other half of what I do is making it permanent. So teaching people how to do it is one thing, getting them to retain it is another, getting them proficient is the main goal.
That's super interesting. And then in addition to that, make it an ongoing practice, right? Because
Correct.
I've been in this business for 7 years, and one thing I've noticed is that if business development is not part of your day-to-day life and activity, it's going to lead to a world of hurt and some sleepless nights at some point in the future. Period.
Very, very true.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks again for being here. Let's jump into things here because again, I feel like this is very, very topical. I've been in business for seven years almost, and in the last 7 months, I've seen more excitement around the fractional space than at any other time in the preceding 6.5. So, love to talk about sales, and I think a good starter would be the almighty ICP, right? Ideal
Sure.
customer profile. And I feel a lot of folks don't even know that they should start there. At least in my opinion, that's where anybody should start. And maybe you have a different opinion. But I'd love to hear kind of some tips and pointers for somebody who's looking to kind of determine who their ICP is, what they can do about it, and how they can put a plan in place.
Yeah, and I think, Bo, this is really important for people that have customers and don't have customers to be looking at this constantly because this can change. But if we want to look at some rules of thumb, I always suggest to my clients to ask yourself one question. What problem is my customer having the minute before they decide to call me? So what is happening in their environment, in their company, where they're going, hey, I should get Jake on the phone for this. And if you start there, that's really your purpose. You mix that with what you're good at. What have I done that will help my customer get through this problem? And what can I focus on?
Mhm.
And part of it, Bo, I think this is an argument some fractionals have is part of it is what do you enjoy doing?
100%.
Because if part of your ICP is doing something you hate doing, you're going to be miserable down the line. So it's going to be what problem am I solving? What specifically do I do good that can solve that problem? And is it something I enjoy doing? And a quick way to test this is to go to people you know professionally
Mhm.
and ask them, what do I do that's good to you? What would you say I'm really good at? And a lot of times that third person, that dissociation adds more value than you can imagine.
Super interesting points. I totally agree. In fact, I post a lot about ICP myself, and I think it should be an ever evolving concept, right? You're continuously looking at it. You're evaluating what went well, what didn't go well, what am I into now? And when I have conversations with people, similar to what you mentioned, I also ask, you do this well, you do that well, but what do you actually want to do, right? And it's what
Right,
you want to do in the next
exactly.
5, 10 years, because if you're lacking that component, then the work is not going to be enjoyable. It's going to be, well, work.
Yeah,
And I
it's going to be
think a lot of
work.
folks get into the fractional space because they want to get back to the work in which they enjoy. So I think that's super interesting, and I appreciate the share. And again, I feel like far too many people want to have their ICP completely done, but it's a work in progress continuously.
Yeah, it's almost never completely done. You may get a comfort level with it, but you may constantly find new clients who
Right.
you go, hey, I could solve that because I'm good at that. And of course, Bo, you're building skills along the way, right? So your ability to do things good is ever changing.
Agreed. And also too, I like kind of the formula to create. And I have one similar. It's, I do X for Y and they can expect Z, right? You know what I mean? Like something
Right. Yep.
simplistic to create, which really kind of helps the conversation. And then finally, the friendlies, right? So again, we agree on this, you know, at a philosophical level, like find friendlies, bounce the ideas off people, but also to go talk to prospective clients, people who'd actually put money in your pocket and ask
Right.
them, you know, and you'd be surprised at the opinion similar to what you mentioned. So I appreciate
Yeah.
the sage advice there. Moving on, so you know, it's one thing to have your ICP down pat, but it's another entirely to talk, you know, about an elevator pitch. Like how do you
Right.
define an elevator pitch? Because I mean, I'm again 7 years in. I think you're longer in your journey than I am, and it took a good three years where it was really crystallized. It was succinct, and I had a couple versions, like you know the 2 minute version, the 90-second version, and then the Cliffs Notes. Like how can
Right.
somebody succinctly, you know, create an elevator pitch that would resonate with, you know, clients, prospects, but also, you know, a third grader can understand it.
Right. And this also depends on the elevator ride. And this is how I try to break it down with my clients is if I'm going to the second floor, it's got to be 10 or 15 seconds. If we're
Yes.
going to the 20th floor, it needs to be a little bit longer. If we're going to the penthouse, I can expand a little bit more. So it
Right.
doesn't hurt to have that 10, 15, 30-second, 1 minute elevator pitch always ready to go. And Beau, to your point, it took me a while to get mine down. And frankly, when I describe myself, I can still say my elevator pitch changes depending on the client.
Right.
So there's 4 steps that I talk with my clients through getting this done. The first is introduce yourself and who you are. I get amazed sometimes when I talk to a client where they just want to go into the pitch. They don't say anything about who they are, what they do, what company they represent. And that's a big, important piece. And repetition is the key. You want to tell them who you are beforehand. And when you're done, remind them of who you are and what you're doing. Right. Because the worst thing you can do is give a great pitch and have that person go away and go,
Who's that guy?
what was that guy's name again? Right. So we want to repeat our name. The second is provide a summary of what you do. And when I do this, I always put in why a client would call me. So I'm Jake Stahl from Jake Stahl Consulting. What I do is this. And when a client would call me is this. Because oftentimes when we describe what we do, we may think it's crystal clear,
Right.
but they may be thinking in their head, yeah, but I'm not sure how that would fit in. You sound good, but how does that piece into what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
So the providing a summary of what you do, in my opinion, should include when they would hire you and where you fit into their puzzle.
That's great.
The third part is explaining what you're looking for. So I look for clients that are X dollars per year, X number of employees in X industry. So giving them an idea of what you are looking for. So even if they're not going to hire you, they may know somebody that fits into your ICP that would hire you. But I'm going to add a caveat here, Beau, because not everybody does this, but I'm a firm believer in it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell people what you don't do. So
I
you would hire me to do this. What I don't do is this. And I'll give you a great example. I have a strong background in instructional design, but I make it clear to my clients, it's not my preference. If you do ask me for it, I'm going to outsource it because it's not an area that I want to be involved with. So I think it's important to say what you will and won't do.
Mm-hmm.
Last but not least, it's the call to action, which should have 2 pieces. The first is it should be specific. What do you want to happen as a result of this conversation? And the second part, and this is a part I find a lot of elevator pitches don't have, is follow-up. When am I going to hear from you? This is when you'll hear from me. This is how you'll hear from me. So email, text, phone call, and
Mm-hmm.
this is the time span in which you can expect to hear back from me when you contact me. So it's important to have that follow-up piece so that expectations are set. And then, of course, you finish it with, and remember, I'm Jake Stahl from Jake Stahl Consulting.
Man, I wish we met 7 years ago, right? It's like I've got a decent elevator pitch, but I think I maybe like hit one of these 4 categories that you shared. I mean, that was outstanding. I really like the reintroduction component because I remember faces. I literally remember always faces. Names. I'm bad at names, and I know you
Me
got
too.
to hear a name 2, 3, 4 times before you remember it. So,
Yeah.
so I think that's awesome. Also, I like kind of the simplicity component. The call to action is really, really interesting to me. And I've started incorporating in like follow-up emails, like just easy bullets with like some helpful links,
Good
a
point.
way to grab additional, calendar time. And unfortunately, I just started doing that about 6 months ago. Like I would have instituted it on day one. It would have made my life a lot easier.
Right.
And then the don't do component, I love. Like when I'm talking about ICPs, what I think what's great about ideal customer profile is that it helps you crystallize what you do, but more importantly, a lot of times what you don't do. And I feel a
Exactly.
big trap that solopreneurs, business owners, fractionals that they get into is literally not knowing what they don't do and not being in a position to say no to that business. And if you state it within your elevator pitch or your initial discussion, it makes everything a lot clearer in regards to kind of engaging you for your services.
Right. And if I got to add one more thing, Bo, is you made a great point about, things that you don't want to do and just making that perfectly clear. But here's the reason. And a lot of people I work with, Bo, say, but Jake, I need the business. Jake, I want to make sure I close it. I need that client.
Yes.
Here's one thing you'll find. Getting a client is easier than firing one.
Hmm.
So if you get a client on board that's not working for you,
Right.
that can lead to all sorts of problems down the road. And frankly, that's another complete discussion. But that's a big part of why you want to say the do's and don'ts.
It's awful. I did a post of this recently where the first client that I ever got was the first client I fired, and they cannibalized 80% of my time, paid me 20% of the revenue.
Right. Exactly.
Opportunity costs were substantial, but I felt like
Yeah.
they're a client. I got to do good work, even though it was the wrong type of work and it was a bad relationship. So I think that's an excellent point. And stick to your guns, which is very
Yeah.
tough because sometimes we feel compelled to be opportunistic, right? Because
Right.
ultimately, we're in the land of opportunity and you need to seize the opportunity as you can, but not all good opportunities
Exactly.
are created equal. Excellent. So we talk about, ICP, moved into the elevator pitch. Now let's talk about sales. And I feel that can be the biggest source of angst for a lot of fractionals, a lot of business owners as well, is how do you sell? How do you sell yourself? How do you sell your services? I hear it all the time, Bo, I don't want to post on LinkedIn. I don't want to pat myself on the back. I don't want to, shout from a megaphone as to how good I am, and not suggesting you have to do all those things. But ultimately, that a lot of folks, they're not born salespeople, but it's a necessary part of the business. So how can somebody that maybe doesn't have the sales acumen or wasn't born to sell can do a better job about selling their services?
I am going to give you the easiest yet hardest thing you can do that will guarantee people will listen to you and want to do business with you. The first 2 or 3 minutes of the conversation, don't tell them what you do. Once you're done the elevator pitch,
Right.
spend 2 or 3 minutes talking exclusively about them. Here's what happens when you do that. First of all, you find out a lot of details about whether you do or don't want to pursue this. You also let them talk about themselves. And what's everybody's favorite topic?
Themselves.
Themselves and their business.
Yeah.
So then they start to feel good about talking to you. And there's a weird psychological thing that takes place. When people feel good about the conversation they have with you, they don't put the feel good on the conversation. They put the feel good on you. And what that does is that sets the precedent for the next 5 or 10 minutes in your conversation. So if you and I are talking and I take the onus off of me talking, and I strictly ask them about them, what they want, what their needs are, how you can help. It's amazing how many times I will have a prospect go, I've talked a ton about me. I want to hear what you can do.
Right.
So you're selling without selling. It's an amazing tactic. And yet I almost never see people use it. I use this on LinkedIn all the time. My first 3 or 4 reach outs to somebody on LinkedIn has nothing to do with me or my product. It's, hey, I see you're a fractional. I'd love to know how I can help you. What are you doing currently? And eventually I get that LinkedIn message back that says, wow, I've done nothing but talk about me. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
And then they're receptive. So selling is about listening and being genuinely interested, not about pitching who you are in your product.
I 100% agree with you. And I feel a lot of folks that are new to sales, their initial gut reaction is to talk about themselves, their product, their solution, bring the pitch deck out. I literally haven't used a presentation or pitch deck in 7 years since I started my company. I don't do it.
Yep.
Like, if you want me to do that, then you're not the right customer for me. Like,
Right.
let's sit down and have a conversation, and I want to hear about you. And similar to, this 80/20 rule, which I'm bringing out again, but like you do want the prospect talking 80% of the time, so you can understand kind of what's going on in their world, what their real issues are, and then you can also tailor your solution. You can map it back to them much more effectively. But to your point as well, like additionally too, like you listen, you discover, but it also adds, like it creates and builds trust. And that is the biggest part of sales, at least in my opinion. I'd love to hear if you disagree, but trust is so important, especially now in such a saturated environment. If you don't trust the person you're going to work with, that's what do you have? I can give you the solution.
Exactly. And they have to not only be trustful, but they have to be receptive. And again, this is a psychological thing we all have, that if I trust you, Beau, that's one thing, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be receptive to your ideas. So when you spend some time with me and you talk to me about me and get me to talk about me, my trust with you builds. So the longer we go into the conversation where I don't talk with a prospect,
Right.
the more the trust builds, and then their receptivity peaks. And it's like, oh, well, tell me about what you do. So when that receptivity is at its peak, then I know my pitch is going to go through. Until that point, the content doesn't matter.
That's so funny. I've actually found myself, I guess I'm doing a lot of this without even knowing, Jake. Where were you 7 years ago? But like I found myself when somebody's talking and they naturally, I've talked about myself, let's hear from you, like almost kind of like asking them, well, hold on, we're not quite there yet. I want to get a little bit more from you. And
Yeah,
people are generally really receptive to that because, I genuinely want to know what they're up to, right? But that
right. Of
does
course.
establish, a level of trust that you wouldn't get otherwise, especially if you're just talking to somebody. So, sage
And
advice, man.
I want to thank you for saying that, the word genuine, because I think a lot of people find this. I was on a podcast and they said, well, how far does this go to manipulation? It's not manipulation if you're genuinely interested.
Right.
So your only role in this process is to really be thoroughly and genuinely interested.
Right.
And if you're not, that may not be the right customer for you. And that may be a signal that this is where I want to stop.
And I feel people can sniff that out pretty easily.
I agree.
And so yeah, no, I think it's a great point that being genuine is important, being authentic is important. And I want to solve problems. I genuinely want to know what problem you have. Otherwise, you
Exactly.
can't put forth a proper solution. So that's great, Jake. I appreciate that. Now, I think this is not necessarily the most important part of our discussion, but networking, referral circles. Again, I've been in this journey 7 years. I'm just now understanding the power of my network, and that I am, as successful as my network. And it's something that I wish I learned earlier in my journey. Both just sheer networking, but helping people, paying it forward, stuff like that. But I'd love to hear from you, from again, people they're maybe introverts, they're not extroverts, they're not comfortable with selling. Like how can folks do a better job, more intentional job maybe with networking and create referral sources? Because a lot of what fractional folks do, it comes back to referrals. That's how a lot of them
It
are going to find
does. Yeah.
business.
Yeah. Most of my business, probably a good 98, 99% of is referrals. I only get the occasional things from being out on LinkedIn. So most of mine comes from referrals. So there's a couple of things in my mind we need to remember. The first is this is a long, long play. This is
Long.
not, yeah. So any of the services, and again, in my opinion, any of the services that say we'll get you 10,000 contacts in 2 weeks, or we promise you 400,000 people on a mailing list, it's not the way to build your network.
Agreed.
I would say start with 5 people. Start with the 5 people around you that you trust the most and have as much interest in your success as you do. Because I was once told this years ago that you are the sum total of the 5 people you talk to the most. And
Right.
I agree with that. But if you trust those 5 people and those 5 people start to say, hey, Beau, I actually have somebody that you'd probably be interested in. And then you go to that person, your network gradually expands.
Mhm.
And when you get a supportive network that grows out and expands like that, you find that the people they refer you to, probably a good 75, 80% of the time, are people you'd want to talk to.
Agreed.
There's those stragglers here and there. There's those people that you talk to and you're like, okay, I'm glad to know you, but it's not going to be where we want to go. So that's super important, is to have that core to start with. I think we're all under the illusion from social media that if we have 1 million followers,
Right.
we are going to be set for life and we are the best people to talk to. But one of the best things I've ever heard is there are people out there with 25,000 friends on Facebook that still spend Saturday nights alone. So it's not the quantity of your contacts, it's the quality. And the best way to get quality, well, it's like how you and I reached out.
Yeah.
We talked on LinkedIn, we had an exploration call, we found that we had a lot of things in common, and now we use each other to help refer and to do things together.
Right.
So start small, start specific to people who want you to succeed as much as you do, and then build from there. And understand this can take years.
Yeah.
There are people that start building their business today that they get their first client a year from today.
Right.
But again, let's not confuse networking with selling. Networking is about being genuinely interested in other people and developing trust and listening. That in itself is a great selling methodology.
That super resonates with me. And also one thing that I've kind of put into practice is being intentional with the networking as well. So, if I have a conversation with somebody and I feel we have a genuine meeting of the mind, maybe ICPs align, maybe it's not. But, philosophically, we kind of agree on some of the same things. I will literally go into my network and try to make an introduction. Now, I don't make introductions just to make introductions. I want there to be real value, but I try to make 1 to 2 introductions to most of the folks that I meet, where I think, this person will receive value, but also this person as well. And I've noticed that that's created a significant level of trust, but it's also grown the referral network like substantially. And again, something I wish I started doing 7 years ago. Jake, where were you then? But it's really funny where, and also taking the first step. Like I feel far too many people, we're reactive and we're transactional. And when you're talking about networking, people that I network with, I don't want to network with folks that are reactive and transactional. I want people that pay it forward, and that do so because they just kind of want to, right? And those are the best networking folks and the folks that I look out for personally when looking to bring people into my network, into the inner sanctum, if you will.
It's interesting too, the way you phrased that, Beau. You said bring them into your network. And I think that's super amazing and something we should focus on just for a second. Because a lot of times we will say, oh yeah, I go to networking meetings all the time. Going does not equate to connecting and networking.
Right. Agreed.
What equates to networking and connecting is to what you said earlier. It's you build something, you find that mutual connection enough that you want to refer them out. So I think what I'd want your audience to understand is that seeing a lot of people at an event or going to a convention is not necessarily networking.
Right.
It's going to a network event or a convention. That's all it is. The networking is what happens during or after with the closeness of those connections. And that's what you get into with a referral circle is a tight-knit group of people that all have the interest of promoting the other person in mind, with only a tad bit of interest in promoting themselves.
Yes.
That's when success takes place.
That's super interesting. And I agree with you about the networking component and believe it happens after. That's where the magic is they really follow up and follow through. And candidly, to me, I do have a scorecard, right? Like it's not about how many referrals, but are you doing what you say you're going to do? And I expect somebody to hold me to the same standard. And what's funny is when I first started my company, I thought if I was going to events, then I was working, but I'm actually an extrovert, but I hate networking. I don't like events. They clam me up. I don't enjoy them. I don't like self-serving discussions. It's a weird thing that I'm trying to overcome. But I agree. And I think too, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but you also need to find what works for you and what doesn't. And
you're correct.
I found phone calls, video, one-on-one coffees is much more effective for me personally than being in a room with 5 people or at a table with strangers that I don't know.
Right. No, I agree with you 1,000%. And I think just to add on that a little bit, I'm also very selective with how I do certain reach outs. Like if I'm going to do more than 2 or 3 sentences, it's not an email, it's not a text, because it leaves too much room for misinterpretation. I'll use a loop video or something like that so they can see my face, they can hear my intonation, and it reduces a chance of misinterpretation. If it's just a bullet point list of this is what we want to cover here, great. Written down is perfect. But if we're talking about something that has a lot of nuances, I want to be selective. And I think we tend to lose sight of that in this age of DMs and AI and texting. We tend to think that is the way to communicate. And I would argue that it is in certain scenarios, but it's not a universal communication method.
That's super interesting. I'm glad you said that. Before this meeting, I actually recorded my first video for a prospect where I noticed something and I was going to,
Cool.
it's everything's in text and like there's so much noise. It's so hard to
Yeah.
live up the fray. And so again, another validation point. So I appreciate the share. And I agree.
Yeah.
People want to work with people they like, they know, they trust. And video and being in person is a big component versus just kind of hiding behind the digital wall. I feel like the times have changed, and welcome to the new world.
Yeah. And if I can add just one more thing on that, if we have time.
Yeah.
When it comes to doing like a Zoom video or posting your picture,
Mhm.
Bo, the picture matters. I see a lot of people that pull a picture from a party they were at or a wedding they were in, and they use that as their avatar. It
Yeah.
matters.
It does.
Psychologists have actually nailed three things that help increase trust in a picture. That's a
Mhm.
tilting of the head, a smile, and slightly leaning forward. It raises trust immensely.
Interesting.
So if you really want to make a good impression and you really like just texting and emailing, make sure the avatar or picture you're using says who you are, not where you were on the beach or riding a bike or parasailing. It's who you are and how they want to identify with you. That to me is crucial.
That's super interesting because I was the guy who used to have the really formal LinkedIn picture, shirt and suit. And I,
Right,
I, I like wearing all that stuff. Like I don't,
right,
and putting on my Sunday's best. But in my day-to-day life, that's not me. I've worked from home almost my entire career, and I've changed that. And I'm not suggesting to folks out there that they should change,
right.
make it more
Understood.
informal. But similar to your point, or to your point, I'm trying to make kind of my avatar actually who I am behind the
Yeah.
scenes and off camera. So Jake, man, that was super awesome. Really appreciate you taking the time. Sincerely, lot of meat here, a lot of great information, and yeah, thanks again. I really appreciate it. We'll be sure to
Well,
put
I'm honored you had me. Thank you.
we'll be sure to put your contact details as a link. And where can people find you?
Two places. I'm not a huge social media guy. You can find me on LinkedIn under Jake Stahl, and you can also find me at my website, jakestahlconsulting.com. That's the only two spots you're going to catch me.
Excellent. We'll be sure to post that as well. Thanks again, man. Really appreciate it, Jake.
Thank you, Bo.